Of the many works made by the great Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli during his long and successful career, his mythological paintings stand out as being the most memorable, the most endlessly fascinating, and probably the most beloved. The National Gallery's painting, today given the title Venus and Mars, is one of only a handful of his surviving mythologies, and the only one found outside his native Florence. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it is a work that has elicited a great deal of comment, interpretation, and also many artistic responses ever since it came to wide public attention at the time of its arrival at the National Gallery in the 1870s. Beyond Botticelli's authorship and the broad consensus that it was originally made for a wedding chamber, there is almost nothing about this painting which is not up for discussion. What exactly does it depict? Who was it for? What meaning or meanings might it convey? Let's start by looking closely at the painting. We see a young couple reclining together in a grassy clearing, flanked behind by dense woodland and shrubbery. In the distance beyond, there is a stretch of green water which meets a walled city on its far shoreline. The male youth is deep in slumber, naked except for the loose white sheet draped over his genitals. He's lying on a large red mantle, which is pulled taut as the toes of his outstretched foot become caught in its folds. His right leg is slung jauntily over the left, its cocked knee mirroring the angle of his left elbow, which is draped over his breastplate as he slumbers. Though his body has been kind of deactivated by sleep, we can ascertain his hulking strength and his athletic power by the lean musculature of his legs, his thick neck, and his broad torso. His head is thrown backwards with neck extended, and the muscles around his collarbone are engaged. His parted lips suggest the abandon of the deepest of sleeps. The intensity of his slumber is also made evident by the ruckus that is happening around him. He is not woken by the small creature who has wriggled into the breastplate beneath his arm, nor by the other three who approach playfully, brandishing his lance. One has donned his helmet, and another, with these puffed-out cheeks, blows into a large conch shell close to his ear. Next to his other ear, a swarm of wasps buzzes in and out of a hole left by one of the tree's severed branches. And yet on he sleeps. To the left, in the position of privilege and at the very forefront of the picture plane, a young woman. She is also reclining on the ground, her extended leg mirroring that of her companion, but, quite unlike him, she is wide awake and fully clothed. Her upper body is propped up on a large red cushion, and she observes the goings-on with something like a half-smile. Some tendrils of her blonde hair fall around her face, but the rest of its thick mass has been gathered behind her back and partly wound into these fantastic thick plaits which loop forward over her shoulders and are clasped together by a brooch at her neckline. Through her diaphanous underdress, we can make out the shape and flesh tones of her calf and thigh, and over the top she wears a white robe with these wonderful slashed sleeves and gold-embroidered borders and detailing. The material is so soft and finely woven that its folds reveal and conceal her body beneath at one and the same time. Notice how the fabric falls over her hips, her breasts, and her inner thigh. And even though she is fully clothed, Botticelli has paid as much attention to the contours of her body as he did to the nude body of her sleeping companion. This emphasis on the graceful, linear quality of the body's outline comes even at the expense of anatomical accuracy. We are left almost scratching our heads about the precise positioning of her second leg. Most, but not all, scholars agree that Botticelli's painting is a depiction of the liaison between Venus, Roman goddess of love, and her lover Mars, the god of war. His physical stature and the discarded armour argue in favour of this identification, while the shell and the seascape behind them, which is kind of sketchily indicated by a cluster of boats, may be a nod towards Venus having been born from the sea. But this identification of our two protagonists is not without complication, since the depiction does not correspond to any known account of the dalliance between these two gods. Certainly, it doesn't seem to relate to the moment when they were caught in flagrante by Venus's husband, Vulcan. These little creatures with human bodies and the legs and horns of goats are identifiable as satyrs. In classical mythology, these creatures were the companions of Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry, and they were typically associated with merriment and fornication. But even without the kind of mythological signposting from the satyrs, we can be in little doubt that this is a painting about sex. Mars's utterly unrousable state, his nudity and his abandoned inhibition offer us a picture of satiated bodily desire. And Botticelli adds bawdy humour to this theme with a playful smattering of sexual innuendo. Take, for example, the suggestive shapes both of the long lance and of the opening of the conch shell. Also the limp position of Mars's hand hovering over his groin, and the leering expressions of the satyrs. And yet, Botticelli's figurative design is so masterful, his rendering of every surface is so expert, with the echoed forms and graceful contours so utterly captivating, that we are transported away from these more base, kind of earthly jokes and into a realm that has a poetic and even intellectual quality. Certain aspects of the painting do in fact seem to relate directly to known texts, both classical ones and those contemporary to Botticelli's era. For example, Lucretius, the Roman poet of the 1st century BC, offers a vivid description of Mars's physical traits and of Venus's pacifying influence on him. This appears in a passage in which he describes Mars as lying in Venus's lap with his neck thrown back, vanquished by the wound of love. Similarly, the mischievous satyrs also have their roots in classical poetry, this time in a description of a painting depicting the wedding of Alexander and Roxanne, written by the poet Lucian. What is clear is that Botticelli's Venus and Mars cannot be solved through a single source, whether it's literary or artistic. Instead, it is much better understood as an amalgamation of sources, merged with elements of his own imagination, to create something which is utterly without precedent. In this respect, Botticelli's painting is probably best understood within the context of his own very sophisticated understanding of the intellectual currents which dominated the Florentine cultural sphere during the final quarter of the 15th century. Many of the city's most prominent scholars at this time were concerned with a strand of learning which has become known as humanism. Fundamentally, this was about the revival of knowledge through the recovery of classical texts, and it was the basis of what we today call the humanities. Humanist learning was promoted by the city's de facto ruler, Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. There are several characteristics of this painting which tell us that it was originally displayed in the so-called camera, which is the chamber, belonging to a newly married couple, no doubt a pair of individuals hailing from two prominent patrician families in Botticelli's native Florence. Though intimate and relatively private compared to other spaces in the family palazzo, these chambers were not bedrooms in today's sense, but more spaces where daily family life would have played out, and even where business meetings might have been conducted. The long horizontal format of our panel indicates that it was a spalliera panel, a word derived from the Italian spalla, meaning shoulder, an indication at the kind of height that these works of art were displayed. Such works were typically displayed either above a piece of furniture or as a headboard for a couch or daybed, or they were inserted directly into the wooden panelling around the walls of the room. One of the most ubiquitous pieces of painted wedding furniture found in the Camera were chests, which were intended to store the wedding trousseau. These chests, which are called cassoni, bore painted allegories which depicted themes of love, amorous conquests, and conjugal fidelity appropriate for a wedding. The popularity of painted cassoni was in decline by the time Botticelli painted this work, but he appears to have relied upon their iconographic precedent for the otherwise very rare motif of large-scale reclining male and female figures. Such figures were often found on the inner side of the lid of these wedding chests. Often naked, these figures were included as a kind of private joke or a secret, illicit element in the overall painted scheme, accessible only to the owner of the chest. But these naked bodies were also intended to be instructive. They provided the opportunity for the young newlyweds to encounter and explore the naked body of the opposite sex before embarking on sexual relations with their new bride or groom. Similarly, Botticelli's panel was intended to be humorous, but also instructive, providing a series of kind of moralizing themes suitable for the couple to contemplate, both as newlyweds and also as they progressed through their married life. What then would the couple understand in Botticelli's image? Allegorically speaking, its message seems pretty clear. Love, as personified by Venus, has triumphed over violence, unrest, and discord, as personified by the warmongering Mars. And in astrological terms, this can be equated to the subduing influence of the planet Venus over the violence-generating forces of the planet Mars. But the love that Venus represents in Botticelli's painting is not any kind of love. And I think that the context of the marital chamber explains the unusual representation of Venus, who is more traditionally depicted as naked, as a kind of embodiment of sexual pleasure. Here, though, she appears fully clothed. Her robes are even intricately bound together with her hair, and she is composed, almost impervious. This Venus represents sexual love, yes, but chaste sexual love. That is, the love between man and wife within wedlock. And this is the kind of love that has the power to dispel destructive forces in the world. Operating on many different levels, whether literal, symbolic, allegorical, or even theological, it is a painting that was designed to draw in the viewer time and again, be they the young newlyweds for whom the work was first intended, or visitors to the gallery today.